Welcome to the Show Me Podcast with your host, Jeff Livingston.
Hey everybody, this is Jeff Livingston. Welcome to the Show Me Podcast. We're in episode number 11 of season 2, and we're going to focus on Trump protest photos. For the last 4 years, I've been photographing Trump protest photos. I'm actually going to a Black Lives Matter massive protest today. It's Saturday when I'm recording this, and it's been almost 2 weeks since George Floyd's death. The president has responded by sending troops in to do pepper spray on people that were protesting in Lafayette Square, something you would never expect to see in the United States, and probably hasn't happened since Kent State when the National Guardsmen shot and killed 4 college students. And here we are 50 years later dealing with similar things. So let me just try not to comment on the actual actions of the president himself and just show you these photos and kind of show you the themes that kind of emerge as a result of the different issues caused by the president. And I think that you'll see what was happening in 2016 and 2017 is still happening today, that there is no coincidences. Also, I just want to say that when I go and shoot these things, sometimes I ask for permission, but generally I don't. I feel like a public protest is something that if you're out there communicating, I'm going to shoot it. I post these on Facebook. I post them on Flickr. Reporters often use the stuff on Flickr. I feel like this is my part to contribute a little bit to the conversation. So with that, I think the right place to start is actually on election night. And I'd like to start with this photo of a young lady who has a flag in her hand and an electric candle. She's a Hillary Clinton supporter and clearly, as you can see in her eyes, is quite demoralized by what's happening that night. This is in Lafayette Square before they put the big fence up. So, I think it starts with his election. And already people are freaking out about bigotry. They're worried about, the race implications of the president. He had shown quite an inclination already against Islamic folks and Latins. And this is something that people were already centering in on. So after he got elected, a lot of people were very upset. They felt like he was unjustly elected based on the population of the votes in the 70,000 in the different states. So I was actually flying to San Antonio the next day for a business trip, and a big, huge protest broke out literally across the street from our hotel. And so I had my camera and I started photographing it. And you can see this protest, a lot of young college students right in front of the Alamo, Latinos, and love Trump's hate. This is America, all that kind of stuff. I usually don't photograph protest signs per se. I've noticed that a lot of protest photos do tend to focus on the sign. I do try to capture more of the element or try to tell more of a story with them. But I think with the Alamo being such a scenic, huge part of American history, particularly Texan history and fierce independence, it was good to see this particular image. And I was shocked at the veracity of it. And you could see the angst of people. Unfortunately, I think that one of the stories that has come out since the election is that the 2016 election, that a lot of the young people that were very angry about Trump's election didn't actually vote in 2016. And I think if there's anything you take away from this today, it is that you need to register and vote for 2020 and do it now. This one is a very stark, harsh kind of message, but the president had a long history of challenges with women, of womanizing, of implications thrown at him by dozens of women, and he simply shamed them back rather than even handling it like a gentleman and demeaning their character. And of course, then there was the live audio feed from his reality TV days, which he talked about grabbing women's you know what. And so I think this is a theme that we see throughout some of the protests. Here's another theme, which is white supremacy and racism. You have an African American and an Asian person, both races that have been subjects of some of the wrath that has been thrown out. And then, of course, you could see a Latin folks are in this protest as well by some of the earlier signs. And then finally, you have trans and the LGBTQ community also protesting against Trump at that San Antonio protest. Now, most of my protest photos take place in DC. I think this is a great photo. You can see this is during the inauguration. You can see all the Republicans in their tuxedos and the police protecting the privilege from protests. And there was a significant police presence. This guy's looking at me, wondering what I'm doing with my camera. I actually had several communications with people during that night. It was quite challenging. I was out there with my friend Nana, and we ran into quite a few people, and we actually broke up a fight or two. And in one case, the gentleman there with the glasses holding his hat got into it with a white gentleman, a Trump supporter, who was about ready to kick his butt, and Nana and I intervened. But you can see this other Antifa person right here. She's flipping me off. Antifa has been, or Antifa, as people call it, I call it Antifa, has been a theme throughout the Trump protests, and most recently again with Black Lives Matter, and the president trying to blame them for what's happened. A lot of folks have, or a lot of journalists have uncovered that it's actually white supremacists posing as Antifa. But, they hate photographers, and they were giving us the grief. There have been a couple of published instances where they've taken photographers' cameras and smashed them. My attitude about that is, again, if you're in public and protesting, then, you're going to get photographed. And I think that's why a lot of them cover up. Generally, my take on Antifa is that they're young, privileged college students that think they're tough and all that stuff. But you know what? It's not for me to say. It's just for me to record them. So here you go, getting flipped off by an Antifa person and a group of them. This photo speaks volumes to me. I think it tells a great story. First of all, you can see, again, through the Deport Trump sign, quite a few messages are in there, from the Playboy, to the Confederate kind of racist approach, and then the hit on the GLBT community. And by the way, I have my photos right in front of me, so if you see me looking down, that's why. And then you have these two inauguration ball goers, and they're dressed to the nines. It's like 30 degrees out, and they just don't care. They walk right by it. And I feel like that's the conversation right now. You have people throwing up every form of protest that they can, and then a good 40% of the United States population just will not engage, will not talk, or worse, will shame protesters for voicing their opinions. And I would say to some extent it goes the other way, but it's hard to defend not having a conversation with bigotry and people that are doing things like ordering police to break up protests. This one's King Trump holding the American democracy hostage. And even though it's 2016 during the inauguration, it has come, unfortunately, too close to truth to be laughable. And then finally, immediately after the inauguration was the Women's March. And I didn't photograph too much of it because my wife went and I took care of our kid. But and rightly so, she went with my stepmom. But this photo kind of captures that fun spirit, and more than 1 million women showed up to protest the president and his views towards civil rights, and particularly towards women. And then just 2 weeks later, we have the Muslim ban. It didn't take long. This photo was an award-winning photo, and it shows a woman smiling as she's greeted by so many Americans that care about humanity and wanted this woman to feel welcome no matter what her her race, her religion, her dress. And I think it's just a really powerful statement. Here's another gentleman, again, also probably Arab, based on the way he looked. But, he's celebrating with all the folks there. He's got his phone up, fist up. I love it. Refugees are welcome. You belong here. I love this photo too. Not so much because she's got the sign. The sign tells you what she wants to tell everybody, but her face really kind of communicates the message more than the sign possibly could. We're happy you're here. And then that was at Dulles Airport. There was another protest shortly thereafter at Reagan. And this is what it looked like from the second deck, just looking down. I believe I actually shot this with my phone. And I did a lot of black and white in 2017. So as we progress, you'll see more and more color photos. But generally speaking, wow, you can see that there's just a massive throng of folks there. And people were worried about the police stopping them from protesting, but generally at that time, that was less of an issue. And then I like this photo because it shows Steve Bannon, which I think is another theme, which is Trump always seems to have these lieutenants who seem to support the message or are part of the action. And then as soon as they become, shall we say, independent in mind, they disappear. And in this case, this woman has him blacked out as a Joker and the vilification of the lieutenant. And I'm not going to defend Bannon because he's got a special place in American history. But generally, there's a vilification that occurs from Trump about his lieutenants and a ability to blame them rather than take it on himself. However, I think there's enough bodies on the floor now that everybody knows what's going on. Love this photo. So cute. What a powerful story. Right in front of the Supreme Court. Here's a 2-year-old girl, 3-year-old girl on her daddy's shoulders talking about and defending her mom's right to be in the United States. Wow. Wow. And then, of course, the whole scene. The thing that kind of popped out on me is not the signs that are facing the camera directly, but the one that's kind of slanted. It says, "Fight fascism." We've seen that pop quite a bit, particularly recently with people getting pepper sprayed and tear gassed and thrown out of Lafayette Square for peaceful protests. Here's a sit-in front of the Customs and Border Protection. And then you can see, thank you right there, CBP. Again, Muslim ban, people getting very upset about it. I think it was at this point roughly that the courts took it on. Eventually, 2 years later or 3 years later, the courts supported Trump. But what you'll see as we go through these is that a lot of the photos happen in 2017. And that's because that's when the big protests were. Afterwards, we saw protests like this here in Washington, but a lot less of them. And I think what happened was people started to get grinded down by the president and his consistent creation of situations. And an exhaustion took place with large mass protests until recently. Here's another one. This is from the LGBT community. Again, love Trump's hate. And this is Gavin Grimm. He is a woman that became a man and as a high school student, and then sued for his right to go to the bathroom and in a men's room. And that ended up in the Supreme Court. However, eventually that court case got thrown out by the conservative majority that was voted in through the Republican Senate and, of course, nominated by the president. I love this photo. Gavin is a great guy. If you meet him, I think you would really be impressed with his spirit. I was really impressed with Gavin, and I thought he had a lot of heart and a lot of courage, frankly. And it takes courage these days to stand up, particularly considering you know that you're going to get smeared right out of the gate. That's my daughter Soleil. This was for the American Affordable Care Act, protecting Americans' health care. It was her first protest. Gosh, hard to believe that we're talking about 3 years ago. She's getting so big, I can't carry her on my shoulders anymore. But it was kind of interesting to be there. And by now, the protests are starting to get smaller, even though it goes all the way around Pennsylvania Avenue. Today, if you go to protest the White House, like I'm going to photojournal, you can't even get this close to the White House because the Trump administration has turned it into a almost close to a developing country presidential compound. The Science March was a very sizable march. I love this one because they had so many kids defending their right to learn and engage in facts and learn about our world. Science is cool. I learned it in school. Love it. And these people came out with the rain. Really interesting. I love this photo too. I think a lot about our children right now. I think about our children and the lessons they're being taught. I see some of the bullying that occurs at my daughter's school. We have a significant reckoning coming in this country from what has happened over the past 3 years and how that's going to impact my daughter's generation. And then finally, Sad Beaker. It's such a great photo. And we have some more Science March photos coming up. This is Pride 2017. Don't really need to say much more about that one. Pretty much says it all. Just a straight up rejection of the president and his policies. I think one thing that's interesting about this, just as we do this today, is it's June, and obviously it's Pride. And 2020, there is no Pride Parade here in DC. So let me just take a moment and give a shout out to my brothers and sisters who are celebrating their right to love somebody else today. And then there was Charlottesville. And just unbelievable white supremacism. This gentleman looks so sad. With great reason. We've lost so much of our civil rights over the last 3 years. The president supporting the white supremacists and their protest in Charlottesville, defending Confederate statues. One thing I'll be really happy to mention is that the Confederate statue here in Alexandria has been brought down. The Confederate statue of Lee in Richmond has been brought down. If there's anything that's come out of the Black Lives Matters movement in the past couple of weeks is finality in some ways, at least in Virginia, that this is no longer acceptable, that we cannot continue to support blatant racism. But it won't bring this young lady back. And she got run over by white supremacists who hit her with a car, something that we have seen a lot of over the past couple of weeks. Again, just drawing the threads from what's happened in the past to today, where we see white supremacists running into Black Lives Matters protests with their automobiles. And then, of course, the discussion of what is a terrorist. We've seen that Antifa is a terrorist, and some protesters feel that people packing iron in public are terrorists. And we've seen several protests from the right where they'll show up, with their public licenses and their weapons, including semi-automatic weapons, in public. And finally, part of this Charlottesville protest was Antifa. They got in my face and started yelling at me about taking pictures of them. This is literally in front of the White House. I'm sorry if you're going to dress like that with that hat, with a red flag, which is very similar to a Nazi flag, and in front of the White House, you're definitely going to get photographed, if not by me, then by somebody else. But we did end up having to get separated by other protesters because they would not let up, and I was not going to stop taking photographs in the protest. Moving to 2018, finally, we have another F Trump. This is actually at a Free Iran protest, related, but not quite. The president has them on their terror list, and people were protesting the way that he was treating the country and begging for the administration to do a better job of protecting people that are fighting for freedom in Iran. But this person showed up with none of that on there. They just showed up with this F Trump sign and walked right down Pennsylvania Avenue right after a snowstorm, which was crazy. So I just thought it was very, I guess maybe the best way to say it is, I thought it was prescient, and I thought it was just another example of the underlying angst that has started to rise up and is just felt throughout the country. This is the Women's March 2018, I think a day beforehand, actually. And people are trying to get this guy impeached. They see now how bad it is and they want action taken. But it's a very divided view of this, as we know. And Republicans generally do not want the president impeached. So, it's become something where people just got frustrated and gave up, in large part because I feel like with the Republican majority in the Senate, there's no real recourse. And we see that later on in 2020 when the impeachment trial actually happens. Science March 2018, good crowd, very powerful, fun again. I love the Science March people, man. They have the most fun of all the protesters. But here is another, kind of random sign. This guy's protesting the president, not the science. And I thought it was significant because of the Mueller reference here. And of course, he looks like a very strong, gentleman, somebody that you can easily see being in that party. And I thought that it was an interesting story to be told just with the photo. And then, of course, I love that we have old folks out there protesting. So many protests these days seem to be like 85, 90% young folks. And, there are many reasons for that, particularly today with the coronavirus. But, this is something that a lot of generations feel strongly about. And it was great to see some older folks out there expressing themselves. I did select this photo because she's wearing a mask, because even back then, some folks were concerned about disease and the spread of germs. This is when the administration started taking children away from their parents at the border. Hard to believe, it feels like yesterday, but that was 2018 as well. This is a whole bunch of Christian female ministers, some males, but generally women of faith that had come out to protest the president and Stephen Miller and their policy separating immigrant children at the border from their parents. And it was just really a heartbreaking story. I love this. Of course, she's showing me her sign, but what really made the photo for me was a young girl behind her who seemed to be of a non-determinable background, could easily be an immigrant, and the sad look on her face just told volumes, and it made me think about the border. And I still think about the incredible photo that was taken of the young man and his infant toddler, not an infant, a toddler, floating in the Rio Grande together, dead from trying to cross the border away from the president. And of course, this is again when you can still protest in front of the White House. These folks actually flew in from San Diego to protest the president, and I thought that was pretty powerful. This one was actually taken in Maine. It was a 4th of July parade. We were there on vacation. Of course, being me, I had my camera, and lo and behold, comes the President Pinocchio float, and it was pretty powerful. I guess it's not really a float, but I thought it was prescient. It was kind of like one of these states that people don't know are red or blue, and it was in a vacation town. So it's not really something that they want to necessarily scare away customers with, but yet they felt strongly enough about what was happening that they included the President Pinocchio float, or the, I guess, I don't know, group of paraders. So the troop made their point, and I captured it for you all. This is the Red Hen, and that's me in front of it. My buddy Richard took the photo for me. The Red Hen famously put its foot down when Sarah Sanders came in there after a lot of the hate that had happened again with the LGBT community. And the Red Hen apparently had several staffers that were LGBT, and they asked that the management have the press secretary leave the premises, and they did. And then these folks were the subject of so much hate. It was unbelievable. Richard and I came there to try to eat, and they screened us to make sure we weren't like right-wing wackos coming there to terrorize them. But, good for them for becoming a symbol of what they believe is right. 2019, the Trump shutdown. This one was bad. It affected my business personally. It affected a lot of people in the Washington, D.C. region who could not eat, could not earn. And it was a disaster. And it was based off of some very, very ridiculous arguments about the wall, the border wall, and stopping Latins from coming into the country unchecked. I think, as you move here, people of all different races and creeds are united. It really hit the federal workforce more than anything, and it's probably strengthened the sense of resentment that group has with the administration. And I think, when you consider America, right, and what we like to do and our principles, work is a central principle, and that's a central principle on all sides of the spectrum. And to deny people the right to work and earn just seems antithetical in many ways. I wanted to show you this one last one because I think it's really powerful. One of the people in Washington, D.C. is our celebrity chef, Jose Andres, and he set up his World Bank here in protest to the president right by the White House near Pennsylvania Avenue, and fed federal workers for free. This is a food line of your United States public servants who cannot or were tight on cash, could not afford to get themselves food, or felt like it would be a burden, and showed up for a free meal from Jose Andres. This is a climate change protest that occurred down on Constitution Avenue. Incredibly strong police presence on this one. I thought it was a little bit shocking, actually. But again, this was kind of one of those ones where you had people leaking in for other commentary, decriminalize migration. So again, you see some of the same issues that you saw back in 2017. Finally, in 2020, you have the impeachment. These folks came to the Senate building every day for 3 weeks during that trial and made their opinions known. And they asked me where all the people were at that time. They said there aren't a lot of people protesting. Why aren't there a lot of people protesting? And as I had mentioned before, I told them it's fatigue. There's only so much that you can do here in Washington, and how many protests can you go to? But we did photograph them. And some of their signage, which was pretty aggressive. The first day, apparently, they got thrown out, but then they got very friendly with the Capitol Police and they let them in. And then this is the fire drill Friday that Jane Trump was running for the environment. Not Jane Trump, Jane Fonda. Boy, she'd be horrified if she heard that. So this is the fire drill Friday protest with Jane Fonda, but here you see again the Donald must go. And then in the back, Black Lives Matter. So you're starting to see a confluence of causes uniting together, basically a unified front on that side, on the Democratic side. But not all Democrats are all protesters. These are truckers from across the country that came to Washington, D.C. to protest the financial policies of the administration and the Senate, which was hurting their ability to earn during the coronavirus outbreak when we were shut down just a month ago. And then finally, we have where we are today. This photo is probably the best photo I've taken of the Black Lives protests. This was the one in Washington, D.C. On Saturday. I guess it was May 30th, just 1 week ago. And it got kind of violent. I damaged the camera. Stuff was being thrown at the police. They were, as you can see, the protesters were right in the police's faces. They were almost daring them to act, and eventually they did act. I left this protest, and 15 minutes later, you could see pepper spray happening, and apparently pepper spray happened. And then, of course, 2 nights later, we have the famous incident where the president pushed peaceful protesters out of Lafayette Square. Generally, I would say that 99% of the protesters that I saw during this day were very, very peaceful. But people are very angry now, and they're angry with being called out in the ways that they have been called out. They're angry with being called terrorists. They're angry with being told to be shot, and also some of the other derogatory, inflammatory comments that have come out of the president. I want to show you some more photos from this weekend. This was 14th and U Streets. This is the Black Lives protest that took over the historic African-American district in Washington, D.C. And I want to show you this in large part because of the wide diversity of people that are at this protest. And then, this is the million-dollar question for a lot of people that care about this cause. Am I next? Am I going to get attacked by a police officer and killed? I mean, African Americans have seen this happen over and over again. And I really feel like we may be at a seminal turning point, one could hope. But, again, with the current administration, that's unlikely. I thought this was interesting because of the police car and framing the photo. Again, this is about the misuse of power, the misuse of force, and what is generally been seen as peaceful protests and also peaceful arrests where people aren't fighting them and then they lose their lives. It's pretty bad. This is the Saturday protest before it showed up at the White House. It was at Congress. I think this is a great photo. It shows you scope, scale, kind of the importance of the moment. And then I love these guys that led this meeting. They were such a great group. I love these young kids that keep coming back no matter what happens to them, no matter how the administration treats them. A really powerful photo, really a photo of the moment. And, the Black Power fist to the sky, just like it was in the 60s. Here we are fighting the same issue, but it's become so much more acceptable amongst the entire population to support this cause. I really hope we see some changes that occur. And then scope and scale, again, going the other way, the Washington moment, if you would, with the ever-present Washington Monument in the back. I think it's important to remember that we're talking about people, not causes. Always good to show close-ups, show portraits. These ladies were kind of cool. And yeah, I do like the symmetry in the photo as well. And then finally back to the White House. And I will be there again later today. I look forward to photographing that. I think because so many people are photographing these protests now, I'm going to probably focus more on character shots as well as scope and scale, and probably stay away from the actual front line as much, although you never know. The other thing I'm interested in seeing out of this round of Black Lives Matters photos is, photographing what I would call the military presence, the lack of badging that has been reported on, and the general movement towards what I would call fascism or a military state. Again, a photograph of the protesters. There was discussion about the Secret Service vehicles being vandalized, and that was the primary story that was promoted by the right media. Here's what actually happened. You can see it with your own eyes. And yes, our last photo is, this shit is exhausting. It is exhausting. I really hope that we get back to a time when we're more peaceful, where we talk to each other a little more respectfully, where we care about each other a little more. But moving forward, we could take a lot of photos. We could do a lot of protests. But the thing that matters the most, and what I'm going to ask every single person that watches this to this point, please register and vote if you have not already. Change happens in the voting booth. And if you really care about these causes in this moment in time, then you will do that. We will post the links to the photos so you can access them yourself online. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Show Me Podcast with Jeff Livingston. More shows, sponsorship, and donation information are available at showmepodcast.com.